Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Sidney Miller. Of course, you're listening to On Call here every Sunday night from 9 to 11, and we have quite the show lined up for you tonight. We have a very special guest in the first hour of the show. I'm going to tell you all about him in just a moment. He's waiting by to say hi and to share a lot of wisdom with us. In the second hour of the show, just to give you a preview of that, we're going to be talking about the importance of sleep and whether your kids are getting enough sleep. Actually, whether you're getting enough sleep. It seems like the whole Western world is now sleep deprived, and we're gonna describe why that may be. We're going to describe what are the proper amounts of sleep we should be getting, and you'll be shocked to find out that probably none of us are getting them. We're going to figure out why this is happening, and of course, we're going to come up with some solutions, some excellent sleep hygiene tips for you and for your kids. So that's coming up in the second hour of the show. In the first hour, we're going to delve into a realm we haven't ever really delved into before, and that's the area of sports psychology. Of course, we're going to do this because of all that's been going on in the media lately with the Pacioretty hit and everything that's raised in terms of violence in the NHL, violence in hockey in general, violence in sports in general. And so I thought to myself, I need to get an expert on here to talk about the issue of violence in sports from a psychological perspective. There's been lots of talk about this from all other types of angles, but there's definitely a psychological angle on this as well. And so who better than a coach who's a sports psychologist? His name is Doron, and he is with us this evening. Lior, how are you doing?
Good evening. I'm doing very well. Yourself?
Very, very good. So Coach Doron is you know what, Coach, why don't you describe for the listening audience who you are, what you do, what sports psychology is, and then we can sort of delve into what's going on in the world of sports today.
Well, I'll make a minor correction right off the bat. I am a sports psychology coach.
Right.
That basically means I'm not a sports psychologist. A sports psychologist is someone who has a PhD.
Okay.
I have a master's in sports psychology. I was trained under the gentleman who was the sports psychologist of the Montreal Canadiens for many years. Two brilliant professors at the University of Montreal, Wayne Hallowell and Claude Sarrazin.
Okay.
So I work with athletes on mental skills training, whether it's motivation, self-talk, attitude, mental imagery, one of my personal favorites, optimism. So all in to help create, recreate, and maintain what I like to call flow in sports, or to get to peak performance. Sports psychology is a growing field. It's relatively new in Canada. It's very popular in the States.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is just trying to get some kind of advantage, and we've often heard of the fact that the game is 90% mental, but at the recreational and provincial level, not much is being done on it. But certainly at the professional level, there's a lot more thrust in terms of getting sports psychologists, sports psychology coaches on hand to help athletes' performance.
Okay, so this actually does go on quite a lot, as you say, in the professional levels, not so much in the minor or, amateur developing leagues, but it's big in the States, though.
That's right. It's often, it's like a teacher in a classroom who's asked to be the psychologist, the coach who's asked to know a lot about the psychology of sport, but it's often best to leave the experts do that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and so we're glad to have your expertise here with us this evening. So let's delve right into this, and then maybe you can share more about the kind of things you do and how they relate to this. But I would like to take, because there's been plenty of media out there about what's gone on with all these hits. There's a Crosby hit, there was the Pacioretty hit. Violence in sports, should we be sponsoring them? Should we not be sponsoring them? What's a psychological take on this from your perspective?
Well, we can go back to our good friend Freud and his psychoanalytic theory, where he argued humans are born equally with powerful instincts towards life and death. He went on to argue, for example, that the death instinct was turned inwards, it can lead to suicide. But when it was turned outwards, it can lead to hostility, anger, and even murder.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps we can discuss the fact that we have a bunch of males competing in a restricted environment with high levels of testosterone. There was what's called the frustration-aggression theory or hypothesis, where this would state that simply frustration leads to aggression. We just need to rewind to January 8, 2011 at the Bell Center when the Canadians came back from a 2-goal deficit and Pacioretty scored the winner in overtime. It was clear Chara was frustrated in the play, being on the ice at the time, and furthermore received a shove in the back by Pacioretty. Chara retaliated, but obviously he was restrained on the play. He really let it out on March 8th.
So just to rewind this, what you're saying is that if you want to understand this, you want to go back to the roots of it, and they're at least as far back as January.
Absolutely. In fact, if you see, there's a good image in the Montreal Gazette recently, clearly showing his glove pushing Pacioretty's head toward the turnbuckle. But when you're growing up playing hockey, everyone knows not to hit someone when the door opens near the bench. Similarly, everyone knows where the turnbuckles are on the ice and these awkward areas on the ice. And as an unwritten rule, they should not be used to get an advantage.
Okay, so something happens in January. This hockey player is upset. He's on the ice. He gets burned on the goal, I guess. And what happens to him psychologically thereafter? I mean, what's going on in this guy's head? Because it's now, fast forward almost 2 months.
Well, just as a side note, I'd love to take it from a biological perspective where
Sure.
Psychologists look at the biology of aggression, but certainly can't do that unless we dissect Chara's head or brain. But he certainly has this in him for weeks and months.
Right.
There's a clear association where there was a frustration occurred, there's an incident, there's a history between the two players.
Okay, and then so you bring this all together, and he waits till the next time he has the chance. Is that what you're suggesting? Or is this more of a spur-of-the-moment thing, or is he planning this out? We can't know what's in his head, but what would you speculate?
Well, certainly speculate a little bit of both, but the fact that you have a history in here certainly creates the necessary ingredients, per se, like a recipe for what just happened.
Okay, so there's definitely a psychological build-up for this because, but I might get shoved on the street by mistake or on purpose. I might not hunt down the person who did it to me. Somebody else might. Is there a type of person who's more likely to behave in a violent way? Are all players made equal in this respect?
Well, there's definitely inhibitory neurons, as I'm sure you know about, which are exercised much more by some people rather than others. But there are what's called cues that are associated. For example, I would speculate the noise helps. The presence of spectators enhance the chance of violence. The fact that hockey players have weapons in their hands, such as hockey sticks, also help. The notion that the players are more protected than ever also increase the chance of violence. Players wouldn't shoot and hit as hard, but because players are so well protected, anything goes. The one item that's being looked at more and more right now are helmets.
Right. Why is that?
Well, we've been sensitized with the Crosby hit, and there was a recent study on whether or not the helmet helped protect the impact to his brain. And there the research clearly shows that the impact and the helmet specifically didn't guard against the concussion. They're looking more and more at helmets. Unfortunately, right now, looks are more important than safety. But, I call this, there's like a delayed reaction in the league. There is, for example, you and I understand there's scientific research, journals in psychology. In sports psychology specifically, there's the Journal of Sports Psychology, there's the Sports Psychologist, there's the Journal of Sports and Exercise Psychology. These articles can be found using sports discus software in many universities, such as the University of Montreal Physical Education Department. But the reality is that there's a constant battle between the theoretical models and the behavior.
Okay.
An example can be easily understood when you think about fraud and criminals trying to constantly outsmart the police. When the police close a loophole, the criminals find another one, another more sophisticated pattern, and it continues and so forth and so forth. The same can be applied in sports. The behavior that we're talking about right now are headshots. With the Sidney Crosby, the league superstar, out of the lineup, the awareness is much more amplified.
Right.
In summary, the actions that the players are doing then there's studies, literatures, then they're brought to light in books. But by that time, it's very late.
I hear you. We're going to break for some commercials, folks. I want to also open up the lines for you. We have Coach Doron here, and we're going to talk about the hit, but of course we're also going to talk about more general about violence in sports and what's going on in the amateur level and what's going on with our kids and what you as parents can do to encourage or discourage this type of behavior, hopefully discourage it. We're going to talk about all that, and of course you have an opportunity to weigh in and ask Coach Doron questions. If your children are in a situation where there's violence going on in the sport that they're engaged in. If you just have thoughts, let's give out those numbers where you can reach us tonight. 514-790-0991. 514-790-0991. Star Talk, that's star 8255 on your cell. That's a free call on Bell Mobility. And of course, you can always text your comments. It only costs you a quarter, and that's at 514-800. You're listening to On Call here on Montreal's News Talk Leader, CJAD 800. We are back with Coach Doron. He's a sports psychology coach here in Montreal, and we are talking about, well, what has gone on in the NHL over the last little while. Coach Doron suggesting that there may be a number of factors that increase the probability of violence in hockey, that being the relatively small space, the big crowd, all that testosterone flowing, and grudges, I guess, that stick around for a while, and the recipe is ripe for some danger. Is that correct, Coach Doron?
Absolutely. You've hit quite a few factors that lead to violence in our sports. There's been a lot of talk, in fact, about fighting, whether or not we should have fighting in the league and in the National Hockey League. And it's interesting how there's two people that have been really surveyed. One are the players, and two are the fans. Right now, both are suggesting that they still want to have fight in the league. But, I mean, I think it'd be interesting to see if we can fast forward 30, 50, 100 years. And you look back at this time and you realize that this is really the only sport where we can just look and perhaps right now enjoy a fight. It's unheard of. Imagine that in football. Imagine that in soccer. And you just sit 5 minutes in the penalty box and carry on with the game.
Right. So you're saying that hockey in some ways, we could talk about sports in general, but in hockey in some ways is unique in terms of major team sports, and that this is an allowable or at least tolerated part of the sport. And what you're saying is that when they pull the fans and the players, we're in a sense, we're all part of this because nobody really wants to rule it out.
That's right.
Okay, so in a sense, at least at the professional level, we're encouraging this kind of behavior. I noticed that there's a rally this week at the Bell Center. Do you think the fans are shifting now? Do you think because there's certainly been an uproar, an upcry, at least in Montreal, about what's been going on?
Well, I mean, if you see what's going on in the news in Egypt, in Libya, people are realizing that they have more power. They are the ones that are supplying the demand, the drive of ticket sales, and the people's vote count. Whether or not this is the right forum to do it, that's obviously up for debate, but it's certainly helpful to like what they're doing. I mean, they're calling their cabinet ministers, they're calling officials, because ultimately,
why do you think? Sorry, Coach. Why do you think this is? I mean, what is? I mean, there have been hits before. There'll be hits again. Why do you think this is getting? Is it because it's Canadians player? Is there something about the time, or is something changing out there? Why is this all happening now?
Well, from a psychological point, we know that in order for punishment to be effective, two things need to happen. One, the consequences need to be immediate. And two, it needs to be severe. The league has done tremendous progress in that regard. And I mean, you think of the Nordiques Canadiens playoff brawls in 1984 when the players were skating on the ice, although they received penalties, which resulted yet another bench-clearing brawl. Right. But what the league has failed to apply is the concept of severity. In the case of Shara, he has no ensuing punishment. The only thing that happened to him after the play was that he received a game misconduct, forcing him to leave the game. The league then has in its hand the possibility to send a clear message to all players, coaches, GMs, and perhaps most importantly the fans, that headshots are not tolerated. but they certainly dropped the ball in that regard.
So what you're saying is, from a psychological perspective, the punishment has to be strong enough to actually be felt as a punishment, and there really was no punishment per se really meted out here.
That's right.
And people are upset by this, it seems.
Well, any hockey city would probably feel the same way, but as we know in Montreal, we have a unique set of hockey fans who have a lot of heart and passion and love for the team, and we want to make sure that this decision is held with a certain accountability by league officials, and to make them think whether or not they've made the right decision.
Absolutely.
The bottom line is that there's a process that's being that took place. The officials made the right call. From an official standpoint, I mean, I'm an official myself. I referee at Concordia University intramural leagues, and I used to referee through Lac St. Louis region, for example, for 1 year. But there was a clear case of interference. The player didn't have the puck. Several seconds passed by, and he got hit. So he's got a penalty. There's no one arguing there. But when there's an injury on the play, when you're an official and you're 12 years old, you realize that there needs to be a game misconduct penalty.
Right. What you're saying is that the consequences have to go beyond the game misconduct.
That's right. That's when the league has in its hands to make a decision.
Right.
And they have the luxury of looking at the video review. They have the luxury of looking at the history and really swifting through all this evidence and making a decision.
Folks, 514-790-0991 is the number to call if you have a question for Coach Doron about violence in sports, about what sports psychology is, maybe for your kids or for you. You have an interest. This is a wonderful opportunity to speak to somebody who's really on the cutting edge of all this type of work. 514-790-0991, Star Talk. That's star 8255 on your cell. That's a free call on Bell Mobility. Coach, if things are starting to change, do you think that what would have to happen to the players, or is it the league that has to start making the rules? Again, from a psychological point of view, how are the players reacting to all this frenzy about this hit? What do you think?
Well, if you look at a lot of the quotes from other players associated with both teams, I thought it was interesting to hear Gomez's comments about those difficult areas within the ice. I talked about the turnbuckles and the doors being open. The players often want to help support each other. Sometimes they make decisions that may not be for the best interest, and that's why they have the association, the Players Association. I mean, I'm working with a professional athlete at this moment, and I ask him whether he's saving for retirement, and he tells me, generally speaking, no. But the league forces them to save for retirement. The league, needs to protect its players, whether it's forced rules, and that's what I was talking about earlier, about the fact that the behavior is the fastest thing that's going on right now. And right now, the hot topic are headshots. The rules are changing, which is great. Minor league hockey has done a tremendous job helping them bring awareness to hitting from behind, for example. They had the stop sign behind the players. They've improved the education not only of the players, but also the coaches and the fans, and bringing etiquette involved. They've also brought what's called the franc-jeu, which is rather than focusing on punishment, because we know punishment has a short-term effect, but positive reinforcement has a more long-term effect.
So you're talking about this where is this happening? Is this happening at the minor level? Where is this happening?
Yeah, absolutely. At the minor league level, there's what's called the concept of franc-jeu, where if you avoid the penalty box, you get extra points.
So that's
you
interesting.
Reward positive behavior.
So this is so teams are playing and they get actually points for not getting penalties.
That's right. That's right.
How long has that been going on?
You don't want to look at, if you look at positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, there's always this misnomer of, what's negative reinforcement? Negative reinforcement is the the increase of a behavior due to the elimination of something. So let's say as a teacher, I tell my students, you better do your homework or else I'm going to call home. So the next day I'm so proud of myself because everyone's done their homework, but they've done their homework because the kids will think at night, I'm going to do my homework because I don't want him to call.
Right.
So those are good short-term fixes because the teacher might say, this is great, but then in the course of the year, whether it's weeks, months, or the fact that it is a full academic year, that's not going to be as effective and as long-lasting than positive reinforcement. I have a tennis academy in which that's really what I do. I offer coupons. It's called the Tennis and Sports Psychology Academy. We offer coupons for positive behavior, and the kids turn their coupons into prizes, and it's a very catchy environment.
So actually some of those age-old ideas about rewarding with tokens, rewarding with Smarties, rewarding with coupons actually does work.
It does work. It's got to be done in a pretty good environment, tight-knit. It's got to be carefully monitored. There's no question punishment has its place in time, but in the long term, positive reinforcement. Excellent.
Folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We have Coach Doron here for a little while longer, actually, to discuss violence in sports, sports psychology in general, what we can do to our kids to help them handle all this stuff better, what we can do as parents, our role, whole lot of stuff still to come, and of course your calls as well. 514-790-0991, Star Talk, that's star 8255 on your cell. That's a free call on Bell Mobility. 1-800-491-CJAD if you're calling us from out of town. You can also text your comments for a quarter at 514-800.
Make it your own. Make it
This is Dr. Sidney Miller. Coming up in the second hour of our show, we're going to be talking about the importance of sleep. Very, very important to our mental health, our physical health, and unfortunately sorely in short supply. We're not getting enough sleep, neither our kids nor ourselves, and that can create all kinds of problems we're going to be dealing with. Also, just to add another little programming note, we're also going to talk a little bit about the horror that's happening for the poor individuals in Japan right now who are suffering. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about psychological crisis intervention and the types of things that psychologists can do to weigh in there. So we'll actually have those two themes running in the second hour of our show. Sleep, very, very important. Psychological crisis intervention in a crisis. Way more important than we used to think. We'll be talking about both those topics in the second hour of our show. Right now we have Coach Doron. He's a sports psychology coach here in Montreal, and we've been talking about sports, particularly violence and hockey. I'd like to broaden it a little bit, and I'd like to also encourage people to call as well. 514-790-0991, the Star Talk. That's star 8255 on your cell. That's a free call on Bell Mobility. Coach Doron, you started before talking about some programs that are happening at the minor level of hockey to encourage, I guess, better behavior, or at least to discourage the stuff that's going to get you in the penalty box, right?
That's right. As an official, for example, we're always looking at whether or not the players have the proper uniform, such as CSA, which is basically a leading provider of testing and certifying services, such as neck guards, helmets, and make sure those are securely fastened. And in fact, there's been, like I was saying, a tremendous progress in that regard, the education of it.
Right, but you were saying also that the better the equipment gets, sometimes the more that lets people think they have leeway to misbehave.
That's right. I mean, you wouldn't. You look back at the hockey slap shots back in the 60s and 70s, and with the fact that the goalies wouldn't be wearing masks, there was a certain amount of etiquette and more carefulness, especially with the fact that most players didn't have helmets. But now, like I was saying, it's anything goes, and it's like a free-for-all.
So better equipment is, of course, very, very important, but along with better equipment, you need better education, because better equipment also allows people to think that they can get more aggressive.
That's right. I think going back to the Canadian Hockey Association, and I mean they've overall done a tremendous job in this education process. But unfortunately, I think there still needs to be a lot more done. I mean, what I propose is the fact that you would have paid coaches. Now, by having paid coaches, it would create more of a demand for this position. It's just worth repeating that there's many coaches that are doing an amazing job in the position that they're doing, but by having it as a paid position, you're going to get more qualified people doing this job.
And what would we want to qualify them, again, from a psychological point of view and from, say, a non-violence point of view? Obviously, you'd want to train them well in the techniques and arts of the sport, but you'd also want to train them in some more psychological things as well, wouldn't you?
That's right. And you would be learning not only things about the rules, but the psychology of sport. And, what is the psychology of sport? It's the fact that there are people interacting, and there are ways to motivate your players, whether you have a coach who makes a big speech, who pumps up their players, but the reality is not everyone needs to be pumped up. You might have 80% of players that need to be pumped up, but you have 20% of players that need to be pumped down. And as a sports psychology coach, I would bring awareness to this player and say, well, while the coach is trying to pump you up, take this, put this in one ear, and then filter it in your brain so that you're not getting pumped up, and in fact you're just focusing on your breathing, for example. So there's this is just one area, motivation, but there's just a host of other mental skills that could be used by the coach to help his players' performance. There's coaches that I work with often in the way they interpret their wins and their losses. The mental skill of optimism, of trying to rebound back quickly after a failure or after a goal is scored, whether it takes a team a season to get over it, a month, a week, a day, or the next shift. The idea is to reduce the time, and so that they can be more resilient and rebound back after a goal.
Well, that's interesting. So that's something that the realm of sports psychology would deal with as well, is how to help people deal with the loss of in a game, or I guess even in between periods, perhaps.
That's right. I mean, there's so many good things and so many bad things that are happening. I mean, we often hear about the same person seeing the same accident, for example, yet it's interpreted in many different ways. So the coach, while he's talking to his players, whether it's between periods, whether it's during the game or after the game, he is the leader in helping the athletes interpret what's happening. I mean, especially at a young age with kids, 5 to 17 years old, it's just crucial in the way that the coach is delivering the message.
Right, I guess because these kids, especially the younger ones, they're really looking up to the coach to give them, as a parent would, to give them guidance as to how they're doing, and also, you're right, how they should understand what's going on.
That's right. There's the players in some communities are often looked themselves as role models. So imagine we need to feed the role models the best kind of thinking, so that they can in turn pass this type of peak performance thoughts to as many people as possible.
Okay, so if I understand this, then in sports psychology, there's the whole idea of peak performance. How do you use your mental skills or your mental set to make you a better performing athlete? And I would guess at the very high levels, that's probably the main thing that distinguishes one player from another, since technique they all have.
That's right. In the past, it was only associated with the problem athletes, but now it's really talking about or discussing and helping normal, close quote, athletes, and getting their performance from good to great, from great to excellent, and from excellent to what I call flow in sports. And that's really my website, for example. It's Flow in Sports. Flow is the ability from, it's a gentleman by the names of Csikszentmihalyi, who basically says flow is when you are at your peak performance, when things are going great, and there are psychological characteristics associated with peak performance. Such as? Well, the time. Talk about Wayne Gretzky, who was often interviewed. I mean, you can YouTube a lot of great athletes and look specifically at the time factor, and they see things going at a much slower rate. You talk to a goalie who, after stopping 60-plus shots in a game, who just says the puck was just much bigger than normal. There are factors.
So this is the ability to, in a sense, slow things down in real time.
That's right. Even though time for you and I is per second, through the athlete, when he experiences the state of flow, things are going much slower, and so he or she can decide and make good decisions in a way that it's easier for them to make these decisions correct.
That's very interesting. How do you think that happens?
Well, the flow state at the same time is overrated in a sense that everyone is trying to get into this flow state. Everyone's trying to get into peak performance. But the reality is 95% of the time we're not in this state. We're trying to get there, but sometimes you don't feel very good, but yet you have to go out there and perform. And so if you have self-defeating thoughts where you're saying, well, I'm not ready, I'm too old, I'm too young, I don't feel right, then you won't experience that state of flow. But I think everyone in a lifetime gets that feeling. You just simply have to extract that by asking questions.
So this is not just for the professional athlete. This is for even us amateur weekend warriors.
That's right. I mean, you can ask someone, how did you feel when you played your best? And everyone's got a best game. Everyone's got a best day in their life. And to go back and to try to recreate, I like to say create, recreate, and maintain this flow in sports.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very interesting. So, folks, we still have time. If you want to ask a question here, weigh in on a comment that Coach Doron's been talking about, or you have some questions about your own performance, that of your kids, 514-790-0991, Star Talk. That's star 8255 on your cell. That's a free call on Bell Mobility. One area then of sports psychology is obviously this idea of improving performance, increasing performance. The term that you use in your work is to have a flow. I guess the other area that's of importance or interest is the role of psychology in maintaining, I guess, good behavior through sports, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that's another area where sports psychology would get involved, not only in improving performance, but in also improving behavior. And as you say, all athletes seem to, especially the professional level athletes, of course, they are role models, and yet they don't necessarily know how to behave.
Well, I was having a conversation the other day with another athlete, and I was trying to discuss with him how the best players are perhaps the most intelligent ones. And he was arguing, on the other hand, that the best players may not necessarily be the most intelligent. So,
what's this about? I'm curious.
Well, I'm wondering whether or not, and this is where probably need to do a little bit more research, how smart are the best players in the world? Do you really need to be smart? I mean, that's where I like to say yes. The more education you have, the better you are in terms of your performance. It would make sense. But the reality is some players are not necessarily very, we'll call it book smart, and are rather more street smart or sport smart.
Okay, folks, we're going to be back in a moment. We've got a break for quick commercials. I want to understand what sports smart means. And, of course, we can still take calls, 514-790-0991. You can also text your comments for a quarter at 514-800. You're listening to On Call with Dr. Sidney Miller here on Montreal's News Talk leader, CJAD 800. We have in studio with us sports psychology coach Doron, and we have been talking very interesting discussion about the Pacioretty hit and violence in sports in general, and what's being done at the amateur level to change this from a psychological or sports psychology perspective, and in general sports psychology, a big field, as Coach Doron points out, at the professional levels, and has been for quite a long time now. In the United States, it's actually been a pretty big field also, even at the amateur or recreational level, but that's really only beginning to grow here in Canada. Is that correct, Coach?
That's right. The sports psychology field in the States is much more has much more research and much more dollars that can be can be given compared to the Canadian perspective, but I think things are slowly changing, and perhaps, hopefully, within my lifetime, I can benefit from that.
Well, okay, so well, talking about this kind of that actually segues into something I did want to ask you about, and that is the kind of stuff that you do. Again, you mentioned it before. I'll mention it again, folks. If you want to check out Coach Doron's what he does, the type of work he does, and the type of program he has, you can go to Flow in Sports, www.flowinsports.com. That's FLOWINSPORTS.com. I'll give you the numbers where you can reach him at as well in a couple of moments. But what kind of stuff do you guys do at Flow in Sports?
Well, it could be a one-on-one sports psychology consulting where I can work with the athlete individually. It can be a what I call a sports psychology interview, where I'll just gauge what 10 mental skills are associated with excellence. For example, motivation, self-talk, mental imagery, optimism, and so forth. And where I would just give a score on each mental skill, an overall score on the athlete's mental attributes. Mental toughness is another one.
Well, this sort of, just to cut you off for a second here, this kind of segues into what we had stopped talking about before we went to the break, this whole idea of sports intelligence.
That's right.
So what is that?
It's just a word that I just kind of made up on the fly, which
Good for you.
Would mean the ability of an athlete to test his IQ in his sport. I mean, if you look at various sports such as hockey, soccer, football, we would think that the team's IQ level varies from team to team, and that, of course, can be further, basically
enhanced, perhaps.
Varies from individual to individual. Now, the question is whether or not the athletes who are the best are the smartest. So that's where sports smart is. Whether or not an athlete who is smart book smart is actually smart in their sport.
Right.
You see cases where some athletes are not exactly so intelligent book smart, but yet perform very well in their sport.
Right, and that's not just that they have physical prowess. Their mental capacity for what they're doing must be quite high.
That's right. They just sort of know what to do. They're instinctively smart. They're mentally tough. They talk to themselves in a way that is best for their sport. Whether you're the John McEnroe who needs to be violent at some points and have outbursts, which are generally not recommended.
Right.
But the most part, it's positive, right? It's positive self-talk. It's a mental imagery script where you're seeing the best plays possible. Often you look at the five senses, the sight, the sound, the taste, the feel, and the touch. But when you're further working with these issues, sometimes that itself is not enough, whether it's the camera's perspective, an internal perspective, an external perspective, and really looking at how the player is imagining themselves play. If they see a mistake, to rewind, to stop, to get them to see the right play.
Interesting. So this is kind of some of the stuff that you would do as well with your Flow in Sports program.
That's right. And if I can put a quick plug on that.
Sure, go ahead.
Perhaps I would offer 50% off on these services until, let's say, this Sunday to all your listeners.
Sure.
From my website, flowinsports.com, you would just need to click on the services button. There's the top three. There's on that page the sports consulting, the sports psychology interview, or the e-learning course that I developed, a variety of mental skills that can be done automatically with the athletes. That's quite a big hit because athletes are very busy and they can just work on their own. And the other thing that I have is another e-learning platform where I can just train a whole group of team or teachers who have classes that use this e-learning platform. So
this is e-learning. So this means that people can go online and train with you, so to speak.
That's right.
Is it interactive as well?
I'm sorry?
It's an interactive type of thing?
It's interactive. The quizzes can be built. PowerPoint presentations are in there. they're automatically corrected. A grade book is given to the coach, to myself, so we can track the progress of each athlete so that the athletes can do this on their own. It cuts down on time. It increases knowledge. And the fact is, performance is enhanced.
So this is this website that has lots of interesting and useful information. And folks, if you also want to try and use the phone to get in touch with Coach Doron, let me give you those numbers as well. It's 514-963-3569, 514-963-3569. There's also a toll-free number, 1-877-778-3569. Coach, where are you located?
I'm located in Montreal. So as a sports psychology coach, they can work with me in my office. I can go see them in their home. I can go see them training in their practice. I can follow them in their games. That's the beauty of the field of sports psychology.
I guess so. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us and for helping to clarify, at least for me, what's going on in terms of sports psychology and perhaps understanding a little better why people get into situations they do and end up getting into the type of troubles that they do when it comes to blending emotions and sports. Thanks so much, Coach Doron.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller.
Been a pleasure. Folks, we are going to be talking in the second hour of our show, which starts in just a couple of minutes, actually, about sleep, a frontier that really is only beginning to get sufficient attention considering it's linked to so many physical and emotional health issues. We're going to be talking about that in the second hour of the show. We're also going to be talking a little bit about right now the horrible crisis that's going on in Japan, and I hope to bring on, I believe next week's show we have a shortened show because of the hockey game. So actually, just by the way, check your schedules on during the week to make sure what time we're on because of the hockey game. But if not next week, I hope in the next couple of weeks to bring on an expert in crisis intervention from a psychological perspective. It's a fascinating area, and I think one that you would be interested in, and especially with what's going on in Japan right now, which is New Zealand, but a couple weeks ago, Japan now, frightening things that could happen to anybody, anywhere, and without warning just about. We're going to talk a little bit about what psychologists do. It's something called crisis intervention, and I wanted to share with you a little bit about that because, of course, the first needs in these situations is for shelter, obviously, for clean water, for electricity, for food, for the very basic and fundamental needs. But it appears that we're learning more and more, and we've been learning about this more and more since Katrina and Haiti, and psychologists are becoming more and more frontline individuals when it comes to dealing with these types of crises. You might think, well, that's kind of odd. I mean, what do? You sort of set up an office and bring a couch and obviously it's not that, and it couldn't be that, and it shouldn't be that. And obviously the first needs are the physical ones and ones of shelter. But what's become clear is that when exposed to crisis, the sooner you do some type of mental health intervention, the better off it is. And in fact, better off in terms of a whole bunch of reasons, because crisis intervention from a psychological perspective has several purposes. One of the main ones is to help people begin to adapt as quickly as possible to what has obviously been a major upheaval in their lives. So it aims to reduce or in some way manage the intensity of an individual, emotional, mental, physical, behavioral reactions to a crisis. Think of it, folks. You're living your life in a normal kind of way, and all of a sudden, within moments, it is turned upside down in such a complete way that you totally lose your bearing. Now, you totally lose your bearing from a physical sense. Your home might be gone. But from an emotional sense, you also start losing your bearing, and you lose it very quickly. And it's akin to any time your physical sense is threatened. We've talked about post-traumatic stress disorder on the show. It's that, but in a crisis, it's that magnified. And so what the psychologist has to do is to try and get in there and very quickly work with people to begin to establish some sense of understanding of what's happening around them. I'm going to take a couple more minutes before the start of our second topic at 10 o'clock. I'm going to take a couple of more moments to describe this. I think it's important, I think it's valuable, and I think it's timely given the horror of what's going on in Japan right now. So stay tuned for that. As well, as I said, we're going to be talking about sleep, something that we are getting way too little of, not just us, our kids, and it may be a particularly big problem there. 514-790-0991 is the number if you want to call already to weigh in on those topics. My name is Dr. Sidney Miller. You are listening to On Call here on Montreal's News Talk leader, CJAD 800.